Hi, my name is Jeffrey Klein, and this is Foundations of Emergency Management. I'll be presenting about constitutional rights within disaster policy. First, it is important to begin with the Constitution and Bill of Rights. These first 10 rights are essential to our freedoms as Americans. The First Amendment is the freedom of speech, freedom of press, right to peaceful assembly. The second is the right to bear arms. Third, no quartering of soldiers. Fourth, freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. Fifth, right to due process. Sixth, right to speedy and public trial. Seventh, trial by jury. Eighth, freedom from excessive bail and cruel and unusual punishment. Ninth is the enumerated rights. And 10th is the power reserved to the states. Next, I will discuss disaster policy and how it is created. The three main goals of emergency management are to save lives, prevent injuries, protect property, and the environment if an emergency occurs. Along with this, a disaster, according to our class PowerPoint, is a dangerous event that causes significant human and economic loss and demands a crisis response beyond the scope of any single agency or jurisdiction. The next question is, how do these disaster policies and constitutional rights interact? The government has to make vital decisions preceding to a disaster as well as after disaster to lessen the damage as much as possible. In doing this, the creation of policy may overstep constitutional boundaries. Every aspect of our lives is guided by constitutional elements. Many people bring up the notion of why is the Constitution so important, along with the idea of how does the Constitution impact disaster policy. The three main purposes of the Constitution are the separation of powers. The first separation of powers is of the federal powers, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. The next separation of powers is between the federal and state. And the third purpose of the Constitution is the protection of personal liberties. These are all essential in keeping us free as people, as well as keeping the government in check. It is important for the government to keep itself in check as well, which is the purpose of these separation of powers. This can be seen in disaster relief when local authorities are helped out by state and federal efforts. Although the government wants to protect the people, by doing so, sometimes they will overstep constitutional boundaries. A few examples of this constitutional infringement that I will talk about include media access to disaster areas of Hurricane Katrina. This is a violation of the freedom of press. Along with this, their right to publish pictures of certain disaster areas and victims was limited by government intervention. Another right that was stepped on was the confiscation of weapons at storm shelters. The government believed that this would help keep these places safe. However, disarming law-abiding citizens due to a state of emergency is overreaching. By doing this, law-abiding citizens are stripped of their right to self-preservation in a place that was ravaged so badly, and a lack of law enforcement presence. This is a major issue. Another issue during Katrina as was the forced removal of the people from their homes prior to the hurricane. This is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. The separation of federal and state powers was also affected due to the widespread federal response. The federal government came in and took over. Last example is the Patriot Act following the attacks of 9/11, which made it legal and easier for the government to spawn American citizens, which is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. As I said previously, I don't believe it was the government's mission to infringe on the Constitution. However, some of the decisions they have made do so. These are just a few of the conclusions that can be made when discussing constitutional rights within disaster policy. Disaster policy should be made to help the people but not infringe on the rights provided by the Constitution. An example of this could be making evacuations highly advised but not forcing someone from their residence. Another example may be different states' political ideologies and laws make it difficult to implement all-round effective policies surrounding disastrous events. The Constitution is a vital component to the American life and it is possible to keep people safe without stepping on those rights. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something very important.